Hey guys, Lord Naren White here, the Holy Ghost, the one true God. Back with you with the next video in my series reading Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens. Without further ado, returning to Oliver Twist as read by Lord Naren White. That he had, from his birth, displayed no better qualities than treachery, ingratitude, and malice. That he had terminated his brief career in the place of his birth by making a sanguinary and cowardly attack on an unoffending lad and running away in the night time from his master's house, in proof of his really being the person he represented himself. Mr. Bumble laid upon the table of the papers he had brought to town. Folding his arms again, he then awaited Mr. Brownlow's observations. "I fear this is all too true," said the old gentleman, sorrowfully, after looking over the papers. "This is not much for your intelligence, but I would gladly have given you treble the money, if it had been favorable to the boy." It is not probable that if Mr. Bumble had been possessed of this information at an earlier period of the interview, he might have imparted a very different coloring to his little history. It was too late to do it now. So he shook his head gravely, and, pocketing the 5 guineas, withdrew. Mr. Brownlow paced the room to and fro for some minutes, evidently so much disturbed by the beadle's tale that even Mr. Grimwig forbore to vex him further. At length he stopped, and rang the bell violently. "Mrs. Bedwin," said Mr. Brownlow, when the housekeeper appeared, "that boy Oliver is an impostor." "It can't be, sir, it cannot be," said the old lady energetically. "I tell you he is," retorted the old gentleman. "What do you mean by can't be? We have just heard a full account of him from his birth, and he has been a thorough-paced little villain all his life." "I never will believe it, sir," replied the old lady firmly. "Never. You old women never believe anything but quack doctors and lying storybooks," growled Mr. Grimwig. "I knew it all along. Why didn't you take my advice in the beginning? You would if he hadn't had a fever, I suppose, eh? He was interesting, wasn't he?" "Interesting? Bah!" And Mr. Grimwig poked the fire with a flourish. "He was a dear, grateful, gentle child, sir," retorted Mrs. Bedwin indignantly. "I know what children are, sir, and have done these 40 years, and people who can't say the same shouldn't say anything about them. That's my opinion." This was a hard hit at Mr. Grimwig, who was a bachelor, and it extorted nothing from that gentleman but a smile. The old lady tossed her head and smoothed down her apron preparatory to another speech, when she was stopped by Mr. Brownlow. "Silence!" said the old gentleman, feigning an anger he was far from feeling. "Never let me hear the boy's name again. I rang to tell you that. Never, never, on any pretense, mind. You may leave the room, Mrs. Bedwin. I remember I am in earnest." There were sad hearts at Mr. Brownlow's that night. Oliver's heart sank with them. Sank within him. When he thought of his good friends, it was well for him that he could not know what they had heard, or it might have broken outright. Chapter 18. How Oliver passed his time in the improving society of his reputable friends. About noon next day, when the Dodger and Master Bates had gone out to pursue their customary avocations, Mr. Fagin took the opportunity of reading a long lecture on the crying sin of ingratitude, of which he clearly demonstrated he had been guilty, to no ordinary extent, in wilfully absenting himself from the society of his anxious friends, and, still more, in endeavoring to escape from them after so much trouble and expense had been incurred in his recovery. Mr. Fagin laid great stress on the fact of his having taken Oliver in and cherished him, when, without his timely aid, he might have perished with hunger. And he related the dismal and affecting history of a young lad whom, in his philanthropy, he had succored under parallel circumstances, but who, proving unworthy of his confidence and evincing a desire to communicate with the police, had unfortunately come to be hanged at the Old Bailey one morning. Mr. Fagin did not seek to conceal his share in the catastrophe, but lamented with tears in his eyes that the wrong-headed and treacherous behavior of the young person in question had rendered it necessary that he should become the victim of certain evidence for the Crown, which, if it were not precisely true, was indispensably necessary for the safety of him, Mr. Fagin, and a few select friends. Mr. Fagin concluded by drawing a rather disagreeable picture of the discomforts of hanging, and with great friendliness and politeness of manner, expressed his anxious hopes that he might never be obliged to submit Oliver Twist to that unpleasant operation. Little Oliver's blood ran cold as he listened to the Jew's words, and imperfectly comprehended the dark threats conveyed in them. That it was possible, even for justice itself, to confound the innocent with the guilty when they were in accidental companionship, he knew already, and that deeply laid plans for the destruction of inconveniently knowing or over-communicative persons had been really devised and carried out by the Jew on more occasions than one. He thought by no means unlikely when he recollected the general nature of the altercations between that gentleman and Mr. Sikes, which seemed to bear reference to some foregone conspiracy of the kind. As he glanced timidly up and met the Jew's searching look, he felt that his pale face and trembling lips were neither unnoticed or nor unrelished by that wary old gentleman. The Jew, smiling hideously, patted Oliver on the head, and said that if he kept himself quiet and applied himself to business, he saw they would be very good friends yet. Then, taking his hat and covering himself with an old patched greatcoat, he went out and locked the room door behind him. And so Oliver remained all that day, and for the greater part of many subsequent days seeing nobody, between early morning and midnight, and left during the long hours to commune with his own thoughts, which never failing to revert to his kind friends and opinion they must have long ago formed of him, were sad indeed. After a lapse of a week or so, the Jew left the room door unlocked, and he was at liberty to wander around the house. It was a dirty place. The rooms upstairs had great high wooden chimney pieces and large doors, with panelled walls and cornices to the ceiling, which, although they were black with neglect and dust, were ornamented in various ways. From all these tokens, Oliver concluded that a long time ago, before the old Jew was born, it had belonged to better people, and had perhaps been quite gay and handsome, dismal and dreary as it looked now. Spiders had built their webs in the angles of the walls and ceilings, and sometimes when Oliver walked softly into a room, the mice would scamper across the floor, and run back terrified to their holes. With these exceptions, there was neither sight nor sound of any living thing, and often, when it grew dark, he was tired of wandering from room to room. He would crouch in the corner of the passage by the street door, to be as near living people as he could, and would remain there, listening and counting the stores until the Jew or the boys returned. In all the rooms, the moldering shutters were fast closed. The bars which held them were screwed tight into the wood, the only light which was admitted stealing its way through the round holes at the top, which made the rooms more gloomy and filled them with strange shadows. We'll go ahead and stop there for this week. As usual, I want to say thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. Please like, comment, and subscribe, as it greatly helps the channel. Light be with you all. Take care, and thanks again.